When most people think of Old Cahawba, they will picture the crumbling ruins of Alabama's first permanent capital, or maybe the remains of Castle Morgan, or even perhaps the ghost stories that followed and made the site famous. But the story of Old Cahawba is not just the story of an abandoned town. Its history reaches far deeper and darker and lends to the question, how did a place with years of history, triumphs, and tragedies become one of Alabama's most enduring mysteries? I'm your host Hatter, along with
Scoot,
and welcome to Investigation. Long before Alabama became the 22nd state in the Union, it was already an important brother in Christ. That sounded like it came from your other room.
That did.
What you got in that room?
What you What you got?
Yeah, what you got in your house? It was already an important place for Native American communities. Rivers provided fresh water, fertile soil, and there was abundant wildlife. Native Americans hunted and farmed this land for a long time. Archaeological evidence, like stone tools, pottery fragments, and other artifacts, show that people were in this area long before Alabama became a part of the United States. Some researchers have proposed that Old Cahawba occupies or is near the location of Mobile. Now, the exact location of Mobile remains one of Alabama's greatest archaeological. What is happening with that word? My brain is like, not flatlining. Jesus Christ. I can't. I was like, I'm going to take over these segments for Scoot so she can deal with what she's dealing with. And then my brain was like, the fuck you are? And now I just can't think. I can't talk. I can't do words.
Can't do words.
Can't do anything. Now, the exact location of Mobile remains one of Alabama's greatest archaeological mysteries. Several different areas have been proposed, but there is no general consensus on where the location is exactly. Mobile was a fortified Native American town, and in October of 1540, Hernando de Soto was traveling through the region and first met Tuscaloosa at his home village and asked him for supplies. Tuscaloosa advised him to travel to another of his towns, known as Mobile, where supplies would be waiting. A native messenger was sent ahead to Mobile. When Tuscaloosa arrived with the first group of Spaniards, he asked the Spanish people to leave the settlement and territory. A fight broke out between a soldier and a native, and many warriors emerged from hiding in houses and began shooting arrows at the Spaniards. The Spaniards fled, leaving their possessions inside the fortress. The conflict that resulted is called the Battle of Mobile. Armed with guns, the Spaniards eventually burned down the village and killed most of the warriors. The Battle of Mobile became known as one of the bloodiest battles ever recorded in early exploration of North America. And although there are a few areas that are proposed to be Mobile, some
Oh no!
What the fuck? I know that word. I've said it so many times on this podcast.
It's just because it's just this episode.
It's just this episode. Archaeologists have suggested that Old Cahawba could be the site. I'm gonna have to start just talking like a fucking robot. But it is for sure somewhere in central Alabama. That was weirdly good. I'm trying to toot my own horn, but that anyways. Now, what is interesting is even if Cahaba wasn't Mobile at one time, it was a Native American town. And when surveyors arrived to lay out the streets of Cahaba in the early 19th century, they had seen the works of the earlier Native American tribes. Flat-topped mountains surrounded by defensive walls and a moat. When Governor William Wyatt Bibb moved into the area to colonize it, many of the Native American mounds and landscape features were still visible, and while some of them were leveled, there were many that were preserved and actually worked into the town, which is cool.
Yeah.
In fact, Governor William Bibb preserved a massive half-acre ceremonial mound. Originally, Bibb wanted to build the town's Capitol building on the mound, but it later wouldn't work out, so they would change the building's plan. Unfortunately, even though Bibb did take efforts to preserve the area, later generations would not follow suit, and the ceremonial mound would be dug up. But we will get into that in a little bit.
They dug up the mound?
Yeah, they ended up basically just destroying everything. So, like, Governor Bibb tried to keep some of the original features, but eventually they were basically all destroyed anyways.
That's sad.
Right. Which also, of course, leads to the, like, oh, it was Native American, is the land cursed talk. But we've already covered that, and when we talked about Lake Shawnee, we know that that's not how this works.
No.
It's not how any of this works.
But still not cool.
Right, not cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Old Cahawba is located approximately 12 miles southwest of Selma, where the Cahaba and Alabama rivers meet together. Cahaba was chosen as Alabama's first permanent state capital in 1819. It was carefully planned and laid out in a very neat grid, much like Philadelphia. Land speculators purchased lots believing that they were investing in the future of Alabama's greatest city. Some of the lots that were once sold for $1.25 skyrocketed to $70 as wealthy investors rushed in, which $70 is about $2,000 in today's money. Just like literally $2 less, but
yeah.
For a time, it did prove to be a good investment. For a brief period, Cahaba stood at the center of Alabama's political life. The governor lived there, the legislature met there, newspapers were printed there, merchants opened businesses, steamboats crowded its river landings, and by 1821 the town's population had grown to over 1,000 people, which was big for that time. Sounds very small right now, but
yeah.
Selecting the site of Alabama's first permanent capital was not a random decision. To Governor William Wyatt Bibb and many of the state's early leaders, Cahaba appeared to offer everything a young and ambitious state could hope for. Geography, economics, and politics combined to make Cahaba an attractive choice. Today, a capital city is judged by its access to interstate highways, airports, and railroads, but in 1819, those considerations did not exist.
Well, no.
Right. Instead, rivers served as the primary transportation network of the American frontier. The meeting of the Cahaba and Alabama rivers offered access to much of the state, allowing people, malls? I meant mail. Whoa! I don't know what's happening to me!
Completely different word, different total meaning.
Maybe I need to get glasses.
Oh. How old do you see?
How old do I see?
How well do you see?
Apparently I can't see or hear well, so... The last time I went, I had 20/20 vision.
So, I don't know, man.
I don't know. Okay, allowing mail, supplies, and agricultural products to move far more efficiently than over the rough roads of the time. For a new state eager to establish itself, the location appeared ideal. Bibb envisioned Cahaba as more than the home of Alabama's government. He believed it could become both the state's political center and one of its most important commercial cities. The surrounding Black Belt, which is dark, rich, and highly fertile clay soil, found in a 300-mile crescent across central Alabama and northeast Mississippi, possessed some of the richest agricultural soil in North America. And cotton production was expanding rapidly. Connected by the rivers, Cahaba seemed perfectly positioned to become the center of both government and trade. Another important advantage was that Alabama already controlled the land. The federal government granted approximately 1,280 acres for the new capital, giving state officials the rare opportunity to design an entirely new city. Streets, public squares, government buildings, and residential neighborhoods could all be planned rather than adapted from an existing settlement. Communities understood that becoming the seat of the government meant economic opportunity. Businesses would follow, land values would increase, the population would grow, political influence would concentrate around the capital. But not everybody believed Cahaba was the best choice. As Alabama's population expanded northward, support grew for moving the capital to a more central location. Tuscaloosa, the growing city that was less than 100 miles from Cahaba, emerged as its strongest rival, and debates over the capital's future continued almost from the moment Cahaba was selected. But Governor Bibb was a major advocate for the location. So a major blow came to the capital on July 10th, 1820. Governor William Wyatt Bibb was thrown from his horse after it was startled. He suffered severe internal injuries and died a few days later at just 39 years old.
Oh, wow.
His death not only removed Alabama's first governor, but also Cahaba's most influential advocate. Without Bibb's leadership, political support for the young capital steadily weakened. When lawmakers were finally permitted to reconsider the location of the seat of government, at the conclusion of the constitutional trial period in 1825, Cahaba no longer had its strongest defender. Those in favor of moving the capital to Tuscaloosa argued that Cahaba was known for disease. It had suffered outbreaks of malaria, yellow fever, and cholera. And this was just within 5 years of it being established. But it was also subject to frequent flooding of the terrain. Those that opposed Cahaba persuaded the people at the 1825 meeting of the Alabama General Assembly to vote to move the capital to Tuscaloosa, which was on higher ground. Though the legislature voted to move the capital to Tuscaloosa and the transfer became official in 1826, losing the capital didn't immediately destroy Cahaba. Instead, it entered into one of its most prosperous periods. No longer under the demands of the state government, Cahaba reinvented itself to be a thriving cotton market and river port, and the town began thriving once more in the 1840s and 50s. More homes were constructed, merchants expanded their businesses, and enormous quantities of cotton passed through the city's warehouses on its way to markets throughout the South. But unsurprisingly, like much of Alabama's economy, and much of the South's economy during this time, it came at a tremendous human cost. The wealth that transformed Cahaba depended heavily on enslaved labor. Hundreds of enslaved men, women, and children lived and worked in and around the community. And it's their labor that built the town, cultivated the cotton, and ultimately generated much of the wealth enjoyed by Cahaba's prominent citizens. By 1860, Cahaba had 2,000 residents, nearly 2/3 of whom were enslaved African Americans working on the nearby plantations. And for the wealthy citizens, however, the future of the town seemed bright. But then the Civil War happened, and the town transformed into a Confederate military prison known as Castle Morgan. And the treatment here was rough.
Why do I feel like this is going to be like another sugar plantation type of episode with the comments? I mean,
it's not actually. It's more focused on the military prison, so it's more like Helmira.
Okay.
And I do have a little bit of a comparison at the end.
Okay, cool.
And this is only going to be part 1, by the way.
I figured.
Just going to throw that in there.
I figured.
Halfway through the episode, and I'm like, this is part 1, by the way.
This is only about 1.
Now, much of what we know about Castle Morgan comes firsthand from the men who experienced it. Many former Union prisoners left behind diaries, letters, newspaper articles, speeches, and memoirs describing their months of captivity in remarkable detail. It is also important to realize that no two former prisoners experienced the same Castle Morgan. While some recorded their experience while in prison, others waited months, if not years, to write about what they had endured. So, I will be jumping around to a few different of these accounts.
Okay.
The Cahaba prison opened its gates in June of 1863. It quickly filled with more men than it was designed to hold, and within just months, it was home to 660 prisoners of war. There were 432 bunks. But by 1865, the prison held more than 3,000 men.
Oh, wow.
The men suffered from disease, insufficient food, and a lack of clothing, medicine, shelter, and even firewood, and reports of the water being polluted in the prison. The main prison had originally been constructed as a commercial warehouse used for storing cotton and corn before the Civil War. Unlike prisons built specifically for incarceration, Castle Morgan had been adapted for military use as the number of captured Union soldiers increased. The warehouse itself measured approximately 193 feet long by 116 feet wide, although it is worth noting that the exact size of the warehouse differs quite a bit depending on the source. Later, in Jess Hawes' memoir, he's somebody I will focus on kind of towards the end, but he states that it was 180 feet by 52 feet wide. So quite a bit smaller than like the general idea of what people think it is.
Yeah.
Either way, it was very small. Its brick walls stood about 14 feet high. Only a part of the structure remained covered by a roof, leaving many prisoners exposed to the weather. Rain, intense summer heat, and winter cold could all enter portions of the building with little protection. Inside the warehouse were rows of rough wooden sleeping platforms that the prisoners referred to as roosts. These platforms were built in tiers, one above another, much like oversized bunk beds but without a mattress. Prisoners slept shoulder to shoulder on bare boards with little personal space. As additional prisoners arrived during the following months, even these crowded platforms became insufficient. Cahaba became the most overcrowded prison north or south. Each prisoner only had 7.5 square feet to call his own. Those incarcerated at Andersonville had 35 square feet of space per man. And Andersonville is even known as one of the worst prisons for the Civil War. But Cahaba had even less space than they did.
Wow.
Right. Many men were eventually forced to sleep directly on the ground. The warehouse stood within a tall wooden stockade that enclosed the prison yards. Guards occupied elevated positions where they could observe nearly every movement inside the compound. Artillery pieces were positioned to discourage any organization escape attempt, while additional sentries patrolled outside the walls. Nearly every prisoner who left a detailed account commented on the quantity or quality of the prison rations. Meals were simple, repetitive, and often insufficient. Bread, cornmeal, small portions of meat when available, and very limited vegetables appear repeatedly throughout the accounts. One source notes it as that the average daily issue became 12 ounces of cornmeal, ground together with the cobs and husks, 8 ounces of often rancid beef or bacon, and occasionally some bug-infested peas.
Ew.
Although prisoners were not starved at Cahaba, they were hungry. Sergeant Jesse Hawes, who we will come back to like I said, is quoted as saying, "The same experience was often repeated. Go to the bed of sand at 9 p.m., dream of food till 1 or 2 a.m., awake, go to the water barrel, drink, and return to sleep again, if the rats would permit sleep." And speaking of the rats, they were a problem as well. The number of rats at Cahaba grew at about the same rate as the prison population. They burrowed into every corner of the warehouse and swarmed through the prison yard. Hawes stated, quote, "At first they made me nervous, lest they should do me serious injury before I should awake. But after several nights' experience, that feeling was supplanted by one of irritation. Irritation that they should keep waking me so many times during the night, an annoyance that at length became nearly unendurable." And then there was also the infestation of lice. Private Perry Summerfield said that only after one night in the prison he was so covered with lice his clothes, quote, "looked more like pepper and salt than blue," end quote.
Oh, no!
Yes. They would crawl all over the prisoners, on their bodies and clothes, and often at night would even go into their ears, nostrils, and mouth.
So that seems more like, scabies.
Yeah.
Or it's body lice.
Yeah. Probably. I mean, like I said, they were literally, like, riddled with disease in here.
Yeah.
I mean, you have 7 square feet.
Yeah.
That's a small amount of space per person.
Yeah.
There was also the psychological toll. The prisoners were often kept in the dark about their situation. They didn't know if they would be exchanged soon, if the war would end soon, if their families even knew that they were alive. And there was conflict within the prisoners themselves. A small group of men would often target new prisoners, beat him senseless, and then rob him of any small keepsakes the man might have had. One source did say that this ended when a man who stood nearly 7 feet tall by the name of Richard Pierce retaliated against the small group after they targeted his friend.
7 foot?
7 feet tall.
Oh.
Yeah, and he beat their asses for stealing stuff from his friend.
Well, you know what?
Valid. You're like, dude, you're in a small ass prison. 1, people know it's you stealing shit. And 2, I feel like in my head you would want to like work with your fellow prisoners to like try to make the experience better. Like you're all covered in lice. There's rats everywhere. You're barely eating. And you're gonna go rob, like, the 3 things that somebody else has? Where are you gonna take them to?
Yeah, what are you gonna do with
your
them?
bed?
Yeah.
If you even have one?
Yeah.
Jesus. Ridiculous. While most of the guards were humane, 2 of them stood out among the rest. One named Hawkins, who shot 3 men in 1 week while on top of the prison's stockade wall, and another younger boy the prisoners dubbed Little Charlie, who also killed 3 men, shooting 2 of them at close range and bayoneting the 3rd in the cooking yard. All of these killings seem to have no reason. Hawes does state that at least Little Charlie faced retribution for his action, but I couldn't find anything about Hawkins. Now, Captain Howard A.M. Henderson, the prison commandant, reveals an interesting pattern for the prisoners. While not every prisoner viewed him the same way, several described him as more professional and restrained than many Confederate prison officials encountered elsewhere. However, he also worked as an agent for the exchange of prisoners that often took him away from the prison. And in his place was Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Jones. The commander of military prisons in Alabama and Georgia, General John H. Winder, complained to Richmond that he had not requested nor did he want Jones at Cahaba. The Inspector General's office opposed divided authority at prison camps and did side with Winder. They looked into Jones's records and found no orders assigning him to Cahaba, but nonetheless he remained at the prison. Jones instituted a unique form of punishment and applied it for violations of serious prison regulations. On a ladder resting against the outer wall of the stockade, Jones forced prisoners to grasp a rung just high enough so that their feet barely touched the ground, and then sustain their weight by their hands for a certain amount of time. Nowhere has listed how long this would typically last for, but it is stated that if a prisoner failed to hold the rung for the entire amount of time, it was likely they would be subjected to a beating. Now, there are definitely worse forms of punishment in Civil War prisons, many of which were inflicted with way less cause, but to the men at Cahaba, Jones's methods seemed barbaric because Henderson's punishments were rather moderate. He's actually praised at being one of the most, basically, kind Confederate prison officials. Now, in one of our accounts that I looked at, Jacob Rush was a young soldier. He served in the 3rd Ohio Cavalry. Remarkably, he enlisted in the Union Army when he was only 15 years old, reportedly having lied about his age in order to join the service. By September of 1864, after several years of military service, he was captured by Confederate forces. According to his own account, he was accused of being a spy and was even questioned by the Confederate cavalry commander Nathan Bedford Forrest before being sent south to Cahaba prison. Rush arrived at Cahaba in October of 1864, where he remained until the closing months of the Civil War. Working alongside other prisoners, including Captain Hiram Hanchett, they would form an escape plan. Now, Captain Hiram Hanchett of the 16th Illinois Cavalry, he was captured near Nashville. Moments before he was captured, Hanchett had shed his uniform and put on civilian.
Chilling like a villain.
Chilling like a villain. He had put on civilian clothing on the mistaken assumption that the rebels would let civilians go. Hanchett further incriminated himself by adopting an alias. As he marched into Cahaba, Hanchett knew that he had made himself subject to conviction and execution as a spy. To save himself, he told a handful of prisoners his true identity and offered to lead them to the Confederate arsenal at Selma to steal weapons and then another 125 miles to federal lines at Pensacola. In the early morning hours of January 20th, 1865, Hanchett and his co-conspirators overpowered the 9 guards on duty and shoved them into the water closet. Rush participated in an effort to overpower the guards and seize control of the prison. The plan initially showed promise, but confusion, poor coordination, and the physical condition of many prisoners prevented it from succeeding. Confederate reinforcements quickly regained control, and Hanchett yelled into the warehouse for 100 men of courage to join him in rushing the gate, but no one responded. Oof! Yeah. It's like, oh, that's embarrassing. This is when Jones entered the prison with cannons and 100 guards threatening to blow Hanchett and his men from hell to breakfast. The suspected organizers faced severe punishment. Rush later recalled the failed escape as one of the most defining moments of his imprisonment. He also recalled the poor rations, uncertainty about prisoner exchanges, the emotional strain of captivity, and the constant hope that the war might end soon. But if historians were asked to identify the single most important first-hand source on Castle Morgan, many would point to Dr. Jesse Hawes. Hawes served with the 9th Illinois Cavalry before being captured and confined to Cahaba Federal Prison. After the Civil War, he devoted years to documenting not only his own experiences, but also the experiences of the men imprisoned alongside him. In 1888, more than 2 decades after the war ended, Hawes published Cahaba, a story of captive boys in blue, a nearly 500-page work that remains the most comprehensive first-hand history of Castle Morgan ever written. Hawes did not rely solely on memory. He corresponded with fellow veterans, consulted military records, and incorporated information from numerous former prisoners in an effort to create as complete a record as possible. For a broad picture of the book, he writes about the overcrowding, daily routine, the flood of 1865, which we will get to, and more. His book ended up being like a guide for historians as they worked to piece together the events. They would compare what Hawes had written with other diaries and interviews that other imprisoned men had left. According to Hawes, the prisoners reached Cahaba after dark during a heavy rainstorm. As they left the steamboat and marched through the small town toward the prison commander's office, they had little idea what awaited them. Their first concern, however, was not food or shelter, it was an escape. While waiting to be searched, the prisoners were placed in an otherwise empty room to get out of the rain. Almost immediately, Hawes and another prisoner noticed that one of the windows had been boarded shut. Believing that they might have had an opportunity to flee before being taken inside the prison, they quietly began loosening one of the boards. Their effort ended abruptly when a nail snapped with a loud crack, alerting a nearby Confederate guard. With no time to complete the escape, the 2 men abandoned the attempt and blended back into the group before the guard entered the room. Although unsuccessful, the brief incident is pretty revealing. It shows that Hawes and his fellow prisoners were already looking for weaknesses in their surroundings before they had even entered Castle Morgan. Following the failed attempt, the prisoners were taken in groups to the commander's office, where each man was searched before being admitted to the prison. Hawes does not dwell on the search itself, but its placement at the very beginning of his narrative emphasizes the Confederates' concern that newly arrived prisoners might be carrying valuables, weapons, tools, and other items that could assist in an escape. The sequence of events also establishes something important about Hawes as an eyewitness. From the moment he arrived, he paid close attention to the physical layout of buildings, windows, doors, walls, and potential avenues of escape. That attention to detail becomes a recurring feature throughout his memoir. Later descriptions of the prison's stockade, water system, sleeping platforms, and latrines suggest that Hawes observed his surroundings with unusual care, because he was constantly evaluating whether escape might be possible, which also makes his account a lot more reliable. After entering Castle Morgan, Hawes and the other newly arrived Union soldiers quickly discovered that the prison operated according to an unwritten set of customs developed by the men already confined there. Veteran prisoners helped the newcomers understand where they could sleep, how food was distributed, and what routines governed daily life. This was more than a simple kindness. It was a practical necessity. Castle Morgan's population changed constantly as new prisoners arrived, and others were exchanged, transferred, or released. Without experienced prisoners explaining how the camp functioned, newly captured soldiers would have little idea how to navigate their unfamiliar surroundings. Hawes' accounts suggest that an informal prisoner community developed inside the stockade. Men shared information, exchanged rumors about the progress of the war, and attempted to help one another adapt to captivity. Although confined by walls and armed sentries, the prisoners established their own routines, friendships, and systems of cooperation. These informal networks became one of the most important survival tools available to many of the men, and for Hawes, it became a source of information. The newly arrived prisoners learned about previous escape attempts, the habits of the guards, changes in rations, and the general conditions within the prison from men who had already spent weeks or months there. As a result, Hawes' understanding of Castle Morgan began to expand almost immediately, not only through his own observations, but through conversations with fellow prisoners whose experiences stretched back before his arrival. Once Jesse Hawes had taken the physical layout of Castle Morgan, another reality quickly became apparent. Every aspect of prison life revolved around one essential necessity, which was water. Prisoners depended upon it for drinking, preparing food, washing clothing, cleaning cooking utensils, and maintaining what little personal hygiene was possible. Without a reliable source of water, daily life inside Castle Morgan would quickly have become nearly impossible. Unlike many prison camps that depended upon nearby streams or well within the stockade, Castle Morgan received its water through a system that originated outside the prison. According to Hawes, water from an artisan well flowed through the town before entering the prison compound. He recalled the water as warm and strongly sulfurous, possessing an odor that reminded him of rotten eggs. Although unpleasant, the taste alone did not convince him that the water wasn't safe. However, while researching for his book after the war, Hawes discovered a report written by Confederate Surgeon R.H. Whitfield, who had inspected the prison during its operation. According to that report, the water traveled through an open gutter in town before entering the prison. Whitfield told the Confederate Medical Department that in its course from the well to the warehouse, the water, quote, has been subjected to the washing of the hands, feet, faces, and heads of soldiers and citizens, buckets, tubs, and spittoons of groceries, offices, and hospitals, hogs, dogs, cows, and filth of all kinds from the street and other sources. End quote. Literally meaning that along the way, the water would be contaminated by runoff, refuse, and other waste before eventually flowing into the prison yard. Once inside the compound, the water entered a shallow trough where prisoners collected it for drinking, cooking, and washing. Excess water then continued through the prison grounds before passing beneath the stockade near the latrine. According to one source, it does seem like in response to Whitfield's complaint, pipes were installed to replace the open ditch through town, which would offer clean water for the prisoners. And while we are on the subject of water, let's talk about the rivers surrounding the prison. They were a big reason that originally drew Cahaba as its capital choice. Those waterways made the town an ideal center for transportation and commerce. Steamboats carried cotton, supplies, and passengers to and from the growing community, helping transform Cahaba into one of Alabama's busiest river towns. The same rivers that brought prosperity also carried a risk. Residents had long understood that periods of heavy rainfall could cause both rivers to rise. Most years, seasonal flooding was simply accepted as part of life in a river town. Castle Morgan, however, occupied one of the lowest areas of Cahaba. Now, the prisoners had seen rain before, but in March of 1865, few could have imagined that within days, much of the prison would stand beneath floodwater. As the days passed, areas that had remained dry during previous storms slowly disappeared beneath muddy floodwater. The open ground between the sleeping quarters became increasingly difficult to cross, and prisoners began watching the rivers with growing concern. Unlike the residents of Cahaba, the prisoners had no choices to make. They could not gather their belongings, they could not move to higher ground, they could not leave. Every man inside Castle Morgan was sit and forced to wait and watch as the water crept steadily closer. For Confederate officials, the situation presented an equally difficult problem. By this time, in early 1865, nearly 3,000 Union prisoners were confined within the prison. Relocating such a large population on short notice would have required transportation, secure facilities, additional guards, and resources that the Confederacy simply did not possess during the final months of the Civil War. As a result, both prisoners and guards found themselves confronting the same unavoidable reality, that the prisoners had to stay locked in the prison as the floodwaters were rising. When the floodwaters finally entered the prison, there was nowhere left to retreat. As the Cahaba and Alabama rivers continued to rise, water slowly spread across the prison yard and into the warehouse itself. What had been once dry ground became a shallow lake of cold, muddy water. With every passing hour, the conditions inside Castle Morgan grew more difficult. For the prisoners, there was no practical way to escape the flooding. Those fortunate enough to have places on the upper tiers of the wooden roofs attempted to keep their blankets and clothing dry. Others found themselves standing or sleeping in water with few options for relief. Out of 3,000 prisoners, it is estimated that only about 600 men could find refuge on the roofs, while the remaining prisoners endured the flood in standing water. And the most dangerous reality of this flood involved the sanitation. The prison's drainage system had never been designed to withstand widespread flooding. As the water spread across the compound, it mixed with rud.
I was getting ready to ask you, what is rud?
I meant mud.
Okay.
It mixed with mud, refuse, and human waste, raising serious concerns about contamination.
I mean, fair enough.
Jesse Hawes described the flood as one of the most memorable events of his imprisonment. His account makes clear that the rising water was not merely an inconvenience, it transformed nearly every aspect of daily life. Walking became difficult, bedding became soaked, fires were nearly impossible to start or maintain. Yet Hawes was not the only prisoner to remember the flood. Years later, other former prisoners also described the rising water, providing independent accounts that help historians reconstruct what happened inside Castle Morgan. Although each man emphasized different details, the recollections consistently agree on one central point. The flood dramatically worsened conditions inside an already overcrowded prison. And hauntingly, the prisoners didn't panic. It was a slow realization that as the flood waters rose, there was nowhere to go.
Oh.
A later account associated with Jacob Rush, who we talked about earlier, states that the Alabama River flooded the prison March 2nd of 1865, and the prisoners endured water reportedly reaching as much as 6 feet in some areas for 9 days.
Oh, wow.
It even states that rations had to be delivered by a boat. Another historical reconstruction, drawing heavily from Jesse Hawes' memoir, describes the prison as being flooded for approximately 7 days. When it became apparent that the flood would not immediately recede, Confederate authorities eventually permitted wood to be brought into the compound, and prisoners used the lumber to construct makeshift platforms above the waterline, creating small islands where they could briefly escape the freezing water. It was not a solution, but it offered a measure of relief during one of the prison's darkest periods. Now, the flood of 1865 did not become one of Castle Morgan's defining events because it claimed thousands of lives. Ironically, it became significant because most of the men managed to survive it.
Really?
Really. As spring arrived in 1865, the floodwaters gradually receded. The prison yard slowly reappeared, and the daily routines of Castle Morgan resumed as best they could. But it was during this time that something did change. It was no longer only the rivers that commanded the prisoners' attention, but rumors began circulating through the stockade. Confederate armies were suffering repeated defeats, newspapers occasionally reached prison officials, guards exchanged quiet conversations, and basically the prisoners received fragmented information about the war. Although reliable news remained scarce, many prisoners could tell that the war was approaching its end. For months, rumors of prisoner exchanges and Confederate defeats had repeatedly proven false, so experienced prisoners had learned not to celebrate too soon. Even encouraging news was often met with skepticism until it could be confirmed. Then in April of 1865, events unfolded with astonishing speed. On April 9th, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to Union General Ulysses S. Grant while in Virginia. While Lee's surrender did not immediately end every Confederate army in the field, it effectively signaled that the Confederacy collapse was only a matter of time. Confederate authorities still had thousands of Union prisoners under their control, and the logistics of releasing, transporting, and exchanging them during the final days of the war were anything but simple. For the men inside of Castle Morgan, the waiting continued. The same walls that had confined them through months of captivity, however, were now enclosing men who believed that they might be soon going home. Now, out of the entire prison's run, housing an estimate of 5,000 men in total, with 3,000 being at one time, the prison's death toll was sitting at only 147 men, which is surprisingly low for the conditions, the disease, and overcrowding that they had faced. Only a 2 to 3% mortality rate compared to Elmira's prison, which we previously covered, that sat at 24%. And especially compared to Andersonville, that had a 28 to 40% mortality rate. What really makes this prison camp so dark isn't so much of what happened in it. Awful as it was, many historical records actually note that the prisoners of Cahaba were in good condition when they left the prison. Well, comparatively to the other camps.
Yeah, I mean, as well as you can be.
Right. However, few could imagine that for many of the prisoners, the greatest tragedy still lay ahead. And this is where we're going to wrap up for part 1.
Oh, sorry, I feel like I couldn't add much commentary into that. You didn't hear much from me.
Yeah, that was a lot of facts.
It was a lot.
There's more just like, oh, damn, that sucks.
Yeah.
You know, like,
yeah, so sorry you didn't hear much from you folks.
It literally felt like I couldn't fucking read. That's why towards the end, like, I'm also sorry if, like, most of this episode I sounded kind of monotone and flat, but it was literally, I was trying so hard to read what I had written, because every time I tried to, like, just tell you the story, I would fuck it up. And I was like, what is happening? So I literally had to just look at my computer
and just read it.
And just read it.
But that was interesting. Can't wait for part 2.
Part 2 is a little less, I mean, it's still a lot of the history, but like this one, you kind of had to, obviously, I'm a huge history buff, but I'm also like not a history buff at the same time. So it's like, I love learning about this, but I know some people are going to find it's boring.
Yeah.
But I had to like talk about the history of the town and how it came to be, because in part 2, we even get to like them literally tearing the buildings down brick by brick to take to another town and rebuild stuff in that town. Like, so it's like you kind of had to build it up. And then obviously the prison camp in and of itself, I wanted to explain that because it's like, you go through all of this and oh my God, you lived through that. And then part 2, I'm going to hit you with something that you're like, oh my God.
Oh, I can't wait.
So yeah, it's part 2 is going to be a lot more fucked. And we're going to wrap up with a little bit of the paranormal. So just because that has made the site really famous as like the paranormal aspect. So we're going to wrap up with some of those stories. But yeah, part 2 is going to be a lot more of the holy fuck, I can't believe that happened.
Okay, cool. Cool beans.
Yeah, so
check out our Patreon. Yes. We'll have that link down in the show notes.
Check out our Patreon. Email us at investigatingwithus@gmail.com.
Yeah, if you've got any stories, we'd love to hear from you folks.
And honestly, we're really trying hard. So, not to get a little personal, but so my landlord is selling my building. I have to move. Rent prices are atrocious. So if you could share this, it is free to share. It is free to like and subscribe and comment. If you could push our content out so we could start bringing in a little bit of money so that, you know, I'm not homeless, that would be super cool. That'd be like, whatever the opposite of cowabummer is, but
Cowabunga.
Whenever something really tragic happens to me, I just go cowabummer and kind of move on with my life because that's the only way I can deal with it. So like I got divorced and I was telling my sister, I was like, well, me and my
Blah,
ex's
blah, blah.
name, is getting divorced. And then I just said, Cowabummer. And she was like, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. And she said, obviously, my actual name. And she was like, you can't just say that. I just Snapchatted her out of it was a Snapchat, too. I just sent her a Snapchat
Not
that
even
was
a
like,
phone call.
Cowabummer. And she's like, oh my God.
Not even a phone call. It was a Snapchat.
No Snapchat. I remember, this is also kind of personal. We're at the end of the episode, so you can skip it if you don't want to listen. It's fine.
Yeah.
When I miscarried the one time.
Has there been more than one?
There's
Okay.
been one.
Okay, I was about to say, hold on a minute.
Talk. When I had miscarried, I literally messaged my family and I just Facebook messaged them and was like, we lost the baby. Me and blah, blah, blah are going home. I think I'm going to get a pizza. And it wasn't because I was fine, obviously. It was just because I think I was so just okay. What do we do now? I'm going to go get food and go home.
You're probably traumatized to the point of
yeah.
Any food?
Yeah, I just want to go eat something. Yeah. And so my mom got us the pizza. She brought it to my house. And as soon as she got in, I just started fucking bawling.
Oh, see,
and I was like, there
exactly.
it is.
Yeah. There was a delayed response.
Yeah, it's actually really common with autism is to have delayed reactions to trauma and stuff like that. So I just Cowabummer it and then
deal with it later.
Yeah, later on I'll spill my oatmeal and just start fucking violently sobbing on the floor. And that's my life.
And don't go too far, because we'll catch you in the next investigation. Bye-bye.
Bye.